Hey everyone, this is Noah Villaverde, host of Blank Green Canvas, and today I am going to be diving into the first 10 films from Academy Award nominated filmmaker Christopher Nolan. Christopher Nolan is perhaps the most discussed filmmaker of the last 20 years, a director whose impressive filmography has showcased a career trajectory that only a handful of artists in the industry have had the privilege of experiencing. Full creative control, no matter what the budget may be. Leading up to Nolan's new film Tenet, I decided to dive back into his previous 10 films in order of their release. Some of these films I haven't rewatched in years. 2 of them I haven't seen until very recently in preparation for this video. As of this recording, I had the opportunity to see Tenet, but you will hear my thoughts on that in a separate video review coming very soon. Marathoning all of Nolan's films was so exciting. It's apparent that he has a particular obsession with the concept of time, as well as obsessive protagonists that often find themselves in extraordinary situations. Whether you're someone with memory loss hunting down your wife's murderer, a magician hell-bent on crafting the next big trick, or of course,
I'm Batman.
You're Batman. Also, it's apparent that his analog approach to filmmaking produces some films that on a technical level will stand the test of time in the coming years. And that's not even including his remarkable storytelling skills with scripts that leave audiences engaged the entire time. So without further ado, let's begin with Christopher Nolan's first film, Following. A young writer who follows strangers for story inspiration meets a thief who takes him under his wing. He ends up getting more than he bargained for. This was my first time watching this film, and as someone interested in filmmaking, it's fascinating to see where a modern master began with his feature-length debut. Shot in black and white 16mm film stock on a budget of only $6,000, Nolan's debut film exhibits so much of his blossoming skills behind the camera and as a storyteller. It's the first example in which he uses non-linear storytelling, which Nolan claims helped in giving the audience an uncertainty for characters in film noir. It also helps make what seems to be an otherwise straightforward story and makes it more rich when watching. It's certainly one of the most impressive directorial debuts I've ever seen, and it's awe-inspiring to see how much of a strong voice Nolan has even with minimal resources and a shoestring budget. Next up, Memento. A man with short-term memory loss attempts to track down his wife's murderer. This was the film that truly put Nolan on the map for the industry. Once again, he uses non-linear storytelling to enrich an otherwise simple story because Memento uses its color sequences to tell the story backwards, while the black and white sequences tell the story forwards, all the way up until both narrative paths converge towards the film's unforgettable climax. Guy Pearce is particularly strong in the role. Leonard is one of the most fascinating protagonists because you don't know if you can truly trust him. Making the protagonist this unreliable narrator makes Memento a truly engaging watch that rewards on multiple viewings. That's something apparent in almost every single one of Nolan's films. Because he dedicates so much to telling his stories, there are elements hidden in plain sight that you might miss on first watch, which makes every revisit all the more enthralling. Next up, we have Insomnia. A remake of the 1997 Norwegian film of the same name, the film tells the story of how 2 Los Angeles homicide detectives are dispatched to a northern town where the sun doesn't set to investigate the methodical murder of a local teen. Like with Following, this was my first time watching this film. It's also worth noting that I hadn't seen the 1997 Norwegian film of the same name, so my thoughts on this movie are on its own merits. Insomnia was Nolan's first foray into studio filmmaking. In particular, this was his first film with Warner Bros. Pictures, the studio he would end up working with on every film in his career after this. It's also the only film that he didn't write nor co-write. Insomnia is perhaps Nolan's most traditional story for this reason, but he still manages to craft a compelling drama that keeps the viewer engaged with one of Al Pacino's better performances of the 2000s, and a powerful, downright disturbing Robin Williams in a role so against type. Whenever these two share the screen together, it's pretty mesmerizing. Next, we move on to Batman Begins. Warner Brothers hired Nolan to reboot the Batman franchise after the failure of Joel Schumacher's Batman and Robin in 1997. Nolan's first film in his trilogy tells the origin story of Bruce Wayne and the birth of the Caped Crusader himself. Origin stories don't get any better than this one. While I wouldn't say Batman Begins is the best comic book film ever made, we'll get to that one pretty soon, it's definitely in contention for the best origin story ever made. Christian Bale is excellent both as Bruce Wayne the billionaire, genius playboy, and in the cowl as the Batman. Also, the score from Hans Zimmer and James Newton Howard that is present throughout the trilogy remains my favorite score in a comic book film. My only nitpicks with this film revolve around some of the fight sequences and Katie Holmes feeling miscast as Rachel Dawes. But Batman Begins is still an excellent comic book film with one of the best endings in the genre, and man oh man did that ending's promise get fulfilled. But again, we'll get to that one soon. Next up we have The Prestige. After a tragic accident, two stage magicians engage in a battle to create the ultimate illusion while sacrificing everything they have to outwit each other. Hugh Jackman, Christian Bale, Michael Caine, Scarlett Johansson, Rebecca Hall, Andy Serkis, and David Bowie. Talk about a stacked cast. When it comes to films that perfectly encapsulate a filmmaker's MO, The Prestige is perhaps the biggest personification of Christopher Nolan's directorial vision. It focuses on dueling magicians and their passionate pursuits in a way that parallels with filmmakers and their passion for cinema. We often hear the term movie magic thrown around, and The Prestige represents Nolan's themes with flying colors. Themes such as obsession, betrayal, and identity are explored richly, and the film has one of Nolan's best endings that recontextualizes the story in a powerful way. Which leads us to The Dark Knight. When the menace known as the Joker wreaks havoc and chaos on the people of Gotham, Batman must accept one of the greatest psychological and physical tests of his ability to fight injustice. This is probably the most discussed film on every video essay channel on YouTube, so I won't drone about everything that has already been said about this film. In my estimation, it's still the best comic book film ever made, featuring one of the most stunning performances ever put on screen with Heath Ledger's Joker. But allow me to get personal for a minute. So when this film first came out in 2008, around July, a week before it came out, me and my family, we were at Disneyland watching the Pixar parade, and my dad got a phone call from a friend of his, and he learned from his friend that our next door neighbor, their house got on fire. And because of that fire, it actually came and damaged part of our house, so obviously we had to leave the park that very evening and go straight home to see what's up. And when we went home, we noticed that obviously our next door neighbor's house was pretty burnt up, and our house had some damage, and it was actually damaged near my bedroom as well, which when you're a 12-year-old kid, that is just absolutely horrifying. And for a week we stayed at a Marriott motel, wondering what we had to do in regards to this fire damage. And when you're a kid who just finished elementary school and was going to middle school in the next 2 months, you just find yourself really scared. As The Dark Knight was finally about to hit theaters, I remember my parents promised that they would take me to go see it because I've been so excited for it all year. And we went to go see it, opening day, July 18th, 2008. And I remember watching it at that matinee showing, and it was all sold out. Every seat was filled. And by the time the movie ended, when Batman rides off into the sunset, if you will, I became a completely different person. In a lot of ways, The Dark Knight really inspired me to look into filmmaking as a possible career path, and it ignited a passion for cinema that I never thought I'd have, as well as a passion for comic books. On a personal note, I gotta thank Christopher Nolan for making such a film and for inspiring me to dive head deep into cinema for that reason. Now we move on to Inception. A thief who steals corporate secrets through the use of dream-sharing technology is given the inverse task of planting an idea into the mind of a CEO. While The Prestige is the film that best encapsulates Nolan's MO, Inception expands upon such themes on a grander scale. By tackling the concept of dreams, Nolan once again tells a story that parallels with the magic of filmmaking itself. In a way, films are dreams in and of themselves, and Inception is Nolan at his most creatively ambitious on both a technical perspective and a storytelling perspective. Wally Pfister's stunning cinematography showcases some of the most iconic imagery in Nolan's career, with the hallway sequence with Joseph Gordon-Levitt as one of the best in sci-fi history. It's the best execution of his favorite themes, including reality, dreams, regret, and identity. Leonardo DiCaprio's Dom Cobb is a fully realized protagonist whose relationship with his wife Mal, played by Marion Cotillard, serves as the beating heart of this film. I never understood the criticism that Nolan's films were devoid of an emotional core, because Inception has it full stop. Top it off with perhaps my favorite score from Hans Zimmer, and you have what is perhaps Nolan's defining film of his career. It's fitting that he received his first Oscar nomination for Best Director on this one. Wait, he didn't even get nominated? Tom Hooper was still awarded Best Director for The King's Speech?
Congratulations, you played yourself.
Then we move on to The Dark Knight Rises. Eight years after the Joker's reign of anarchy, Batman, with the help of the enigmatic Catwoman, is forced from his exile to save Gotham City from the brutal guerrilla terrorist, Bane. Besides Star Wars The Force Awakens and Avengers Endgame, I've never been more excited for a movie in my life. I remember counting down the months, weeks, days, hours, minutes, and seconds until I finally sat down in a theater at an early screening to watch Nolan's epic conclusion to his Dark Knight trilogy. I must admit, I remember thinking that the film was a masterpiece on the first few viewings, but having revisited it recently for the first time in several years, I enjoyed it considerably less than I remembered. Now don't get me wrong, I still enjoy watching it, but it's certainly the weakest film of the trilogy, and Nolan's worst film in his filmography. Again, in grading this film, it's a B in an otherwise straight A report card from Nolan. Now I love Tom Hardy's performance as Bane, but I feel that the story shortchanges him in the end, deeming him less significant than we expected. I have some major issues with the film that prevent me from loving it entirely, but there are a lot of things in it that I do love. Pain is at the core of Bruce Wayne's story in particular, and I'd say Nolan portrays that theme quite well throughout, albeit with a few bumps along the road. Every scene with Michael Caine as Alfred leaves me in tears. Anne Hathaway steals every scene she is in as Catwoman, and I also really like Joseph Gordon-Levitt's character John Blake. I also think that Hans Zimmer's score is the best it's ever been with the trilogy. Overall, The Dark Knight Rises is fine. It has a few too many issues that prevent it from being great, but I'm otherwise happy with how the trilogy ended. Now we move on to Interstellar. A team of explorers travel through a wormhole in space in an attempt to ensure humanity's survival. Interstellar is one of Nolan's most ambitious films. Clocking in at a whopping 2 hours and 49 minutes, it's his longest film and in many ways his most emotional one. I hadn't seen this film since I first saw it in 70mm IMAX in November 2014, and that is still one of the best movie-going experiences I've ever had. Interstellar features some of the most stunning space exploration sequences ever put to film, and Nolan's use of the IMAX cameras really immersed viewers into the movie. Even watching it on Blu-ray at home, I felt some of the vertigo during some of the incredible sequences. On a storytelling standpoint, Interstellar mostly succeeds, but has a few stumbling blocks along the way. Without giving away too much, Nolan bites off a bit more than he can chew narratively, with the resolution of Cooper's arc being a bit too cheesy for an otherwise serious film. But even with that in mind, I still contend that Interstellar features Nolan's most human protagonist to date with Matthew McConaughey's Cooper. McConaughey is tremendous in the role, and the sequence when he watches the video footage of his son back on Earth growing up without him is gut-wrenching. Hans Zimmer's score is also a nice change of pace from what we've heard from the Dark Knight trilogy and Inception, and the music only amplifies the sense of awe we get when we travel through space with McConaughey and his crew. Interstellar has a few narrative bumps and definitely runs a bit too long, but it's still remarkable in its own right, and it also is proof that Nolan is capable of emotional storytelling. And then we get to Dunkirk. Allied soldiers from Belgium, the British Empire, and France are surrounded by the German army and evacuated during a fierce battle in World War II. I consider Dunkirk to be one of the best war films ever made. Besides maybe Inception, it's Nolan's best work as a director yet. Nolan has made it clear that he believes in the cinematic experience and made a film that is best enjoyed in IMAX with the best surround sound in the world. The sound design is so good that you will find yourself ducking along with the soldiers amidst the gunfire of the elusive Germans. On a technical scale, Nolan's Dunkirk is virtually flawless. But what makes Dunkirk stand out amongst other war films is in how Nolan's penchant for non-linear storytelling is realized here. Told in 3 separate stories, one told over the course of 1 week, one over the course of 1 day, and one over the course of 1 hour, all 3 stories are intertwined to present a brutal and stunning portrait of the Dunkirk evacuation as seen from land, sea, and air. Nolan doesn't use his characters to dump exposition for the audience to understand what's going on, but rather thrusts audiences right into the action immediately with endless tension throughout. When all is said and done, I think Dunkirk will be Nolan's most timeless film, and certainly in contention as one of his best. So those were my thoughts on Christopher Nolan's first 10 films, and it's safe to say that he's solidified himself as one of the defining filmmakers of the century. When you look back at the blockbuster landscape of the 2000s, you would see the seeds of the comic book movie genre as we know it today planted. Numerous films based on these costumed characters, 2 of which were directed by Nolan, would hit theaters worldwide. The most successful films of that decade were still based on pre-existing intellectual properties, but it's worth noting that the highest grossing film of that decade was James Cameron's Avatar in 2009, an original non-IP film that dethroned Cameron's previous film, Titanic. With that in mind, it's interesting that once the 2010s hit, Hollywood would further embrace pre-existing IPs and adaptations. In particular, the blockbuster landscape of the 2010s was defined by both the comic book movie genre with shared universes and nostalgia, particularly for franchises that launched back in the 1970s, 80s, and 90s. The highest grossing films of the 2010s were primarily based on established franchises, with very little non-IP films in that list. In Hollywood today, one of the ways filmmakers can achieve full creative control with massive budgets is to follow a one for you and one for me system. There are very few examples of auteurs working in that sphere, which is why Christopher Nolan is the prime example of that today. Make no mistake about it, it was thanks to Nolan's contributions with the Dark Knight trilogy and their massive critical and commercial success that allowed Warner Brothers to greenlight some of his original passion projects. And thank God he's still making big movies with his singular voice. Because look, I love comic book movies and a lot of big film franchises as much as the next guy, but I still look forward to seeing someone like Christopher Nolan create something wholly original with his own singular directing voice, because he is still like one of the best filmmakers we have, and definitely in my top 5 favorite filmmakers of all time. I am Noah Villaverde, host of Blank Green Canvas, and stay tuned because a review of Tenet is coming very, very soon.